It's time now for the news review of this bulletin. Russia says that it will not retreat in the face of U.S. threats as Moscow and the West remain locked in a standoff over Ukraine. Russia's embassy in Washington has responded to the recent U.S. sanctions threats. It says that Moscow is not standing tension and listening to those threats. The White House has said that it is ready to impose sanctions on President Putin's inner circle if Russia attacks Ukraine. The Russian embassy blames Washington for the ongoing tensions. The two countries' top diplomats are set to speak over the phone later on Tuesday. The U.S. and its allies are accusing Russia of planning an imminent invasion of Ukraine. Moscow says that it has no plans to start a war, but it is demanding binding guarantees that Ukraine won't join NATO. Marcus Papadopoulos is a historian, political analyst, and author joining us from London. We also have John Stepling, author and commentator, joining us from Inderøy, Norway. I'd like to welcome you both. John Stepling, if we start with you with a basic question that there's still this, I'm not too sure what to call it, but it's a statement coming from the U.S. where it's issuing a warning of which some are following, and that is the invasion of Ukraine. And they're set to talk again, Russia and the U.S., about this. President Zelensky has come out and said, you know, this is being hyped up by the West. He hasn't said exactly the U.S. Why do you think then we're looking at diverging views here, in particular from the country that is being said that it's going to get invaded and is saying we're not going to get invaded?
Right. Yeah. No. I mean, this is the entire storyline of a Russian invasion is the product of the United States propaganda apparatus, the U.S. State Department and Pentagon. The Russian troop, what they keep talking about, the danger of Russian troop buildup within its own borders has also been exaggerated. I mean, different U.S. commentators have noted it really isn't much of a buildup at all, and even the government the government that took power in 2014, with the coup, they even admit they don't think Russia's going to invade them. But it needs to be emphasized that the coup in 2014 that put this neo-Nazi government in power was backed by Victoria Nuland, Joe Biden, John McCain, all kinds of people. And they were openly neo-Nazis. There were pogroms afterwards. Ethnic Russians were burnt. This is a party that wears Nazi insignia, the Azov Battalion, the Svoboda Party. They glorify, Ukrainian collaborators with the Third Reich. So the people in the region under their power, if they're ethnically Russian, they live in great fear, and Putin is aware of this and is greatly concerned. But Russia has no intentions of invading. They are, exercising caution given the fact that, back in '91, the U.S., I think it was James Baker, promised Gorbachev, we will not move 1 inch eastward. NATO will not go 1 inch eastward. Since then, they've gone eastward 800 some miles. They've included Poland, Romania, Lithuania, Bulgaria, etc. into NATO. Now they want Ukraine. I think they're a long ways from making that happen, but that's an implicit threat to Russia, and it's going to be something that is the central issue of tension between them. Sure. But frankly, I don't think the U.S. has any intention of, they sent 8,000 troops in recently or something in war around Belarus, and Poland has contributed troops, and they've given trillions, not trillions, but billions of hundreds of billions of dollars to the last 10 years to Ukraine. They've helped train them, but I don't think they're looking for an actual, hot war with Ukraine right now. They can't afford to do it.
Well, Wendy Sherman says they're going to come sometime in February. I think it was the early February. Maybe she's given out an exact date. I'm not sure. Anyways, Marcus Papadopoulos, we're looking at what appears to be, again, I kind of said that in my question to John Stepling, divergent views when it comes to Ukraine from within European countries. For example, you have these talks, the Normandy talks, as they were called, that happened between France, Germany, Ukraine, and Russia. Are we looking at the fact that the U.S. line is not being bought by European countries? So what then will happen after that?
Well, I should say, first of all, that for the past 8 years, the Kremlin has been devising a strategy to confront, contain, and defeat the perilous menace emanating from Ukraine against Russian national security, a menace which is in place as a result of the West's engineered coup in Ukraine in February of 2014. And no one should be under the illusion that the Kremlin will not take some form of action to ensure its security on its southern border and to ensure that Ukraine is never admitted into the ranks of NATO. And the sanctions that the West is threatening against Russia would be, if they are employed, probably the most stringent that the West has ever placed on another country. But nonetheless, as I said just now, the Kremlin has been anticipating and preparing itself for such an eventuality. Indeed, we can go even further and say that during the Second World War, 30 million Russians sacrificed their lives to defend Russia and to ensure the preservation of the Russian people. Therefore, Russia will go to any lengths to defend its national security, and that means being the victim of the West's most stringent sanctions if they are to be introduced. And when it comes to Ukraine, the West is
You think
divided.
they'll do it? You think the West will do that?
In particular, NATO is divided.
Marcus Papadopoulos, do you think the West is going to go ahead with the sanctions? It is, I think the most recent threat is the inner circle of Putin.
The NATO is divided. The French, the Germans, the Hungarians, and the Greeks, for example, do not support the belligerent attitude of America and Britain towards Russia. And I believe that should Russia take some form of military action against Ukraine, which is a possibility, then yes, the West would place probably the most severe sanctions on Russia that the world has ever seen. But the Russians have no choice in the matter. Russia is under threat. Russia must be defended. And the Russian people throughout their history have gone to extraordinary lengths to defend the motherland.
All right. Well, John Stepling, I think the U.S. and some of its politicians said that they are getting ready to exercise the mother of all sanctions against the U.S. But I'd like to ask you about what was dismissed initially when it was flouted by the Russian President Vladimir Putin, but it seems to have taken a serious turn. And that was when Putin, or reports came out, and when he also said that he's not going to rule out the possibility, which at this point I think there are talks, that he will talk to Cuba and Venezuela and talk about some kind of perhaps deployment. At first, again, that was dismissed, but that may be taking a serious turn. And tell us why that would alarm the U.S.
Well, I think the U.S. would find it, it would be met with a very hysterical reaction in Washington, and they wouldn't tolerate it. I don't think what they would do, I don't know, but I don't think Russia's going to do that. Look, the U.S. is suffering internally, and whenever countries have internal tension, and I mean, we just had a bridge collapse in Pittsburgh. We're seeing a crumbling infrastructure, the pandemic, state response to that, through millions of people, 3 million jobs lost, people in homelessness spike, depression, suicide. So they are projecting outward and creating an external threat and describing Russia as an existential threat and so forth, because that's what countries do when they are, in internal turmoil. I don't think any of this is going to happen. I think the U.S. will place sanctions on Russia. It's backed itself into a corner, and economically they have to do something to try to reclaim the monetary preeminence that China has taken from them over the last few years. And so I think there will be sanctions. But I think there's more backdoor discussion going on than we are led to believe. I don't think there's going to be any hot war or armed conflict. Russia very rightly has drawn a line in the sand and said, you know, Ukraine cannot join NATO.
Right.
But as Marcus said, there's a number of countries in NATO that don't want it. Bulgaria too has forbidden any Bulgarian troops from being involved in this. Turkey wants no part of it. So NATO is hardly on board with you know, U.S. stated intentions. So I think that's where we are. It's a lot of rhetoric right now.
Yeah, I wish we had more time to cover because there's so much ground to cover on this topic. Unfortunately, we don't. But let me thank you, John Stepling, author and commentator from Inderoy, Norway. Marcus Papadopoulos, thank you so much for your input. Historian, political analyst, and author from London. And with that, we come to an end for this news review.